Comic-Con. How are we doing today? That's right. When I was asked to moderate this panel, I had a small stroke in my brain and screamed for about a minute, and then my husband came and was like, "Are you okay?" I go, "Oh my God, look at the talent on this panel. They're letting me be here. Oh my God." So I've already fangirled in front of them, and I'm probably sure you will all be fanboy, fangirl, fan non-binary in front of them as well. So with that in mind, my name is Judy Prince-Neeb. I am a youth services librarian, soon to be with the Torrance Library starting on Monday. Thank you. I am also, oddly enough, the romance book club discussion leader for the Mysterious Galaxy bookstore, and we will touch upon love in a moment. But I'm also a huge advocate for children's horror, and that even in birth, scariness and horror should be read and explored at all ages. So with that in mind, today our amazing panel of authors are creeping it real as they discuss all that goes bump in the night and all the tricks or treats of writing horror. All right, let's get into our panelists. Our first panelist to my left is the distinguished Dr. Chuck Tingle, who is a mysterious force of energy behind sunglasses and a pink mask. He is also the anonymous author of romance, horror, and fantasy. Chuck was born in Home of Truth, Utah, and now splits time between Billings, Montana, and Los Angeles, California. Chuck writes to prove love is real, because love is the most important tool we have when resisting the endless cosmic void. Not everything people say about Chuck is true, but the important things are. And our next panelist, and I know you said, I just realized the way that you said your name was different than I keep having in my head. Say it again.
Catriona.
Catriona, because I keep wanting to say Katrina, and I apologize. But Catriona, that's right, okay, was born in Washington, D.C., and grew up in the United States, Kenya, Madagascar, Yemen, and Morocco. Ward is a 3-time winner of the August Derleth Award for Best Horror Novel for The Girl from Raw Blood, her debut, Little Eve, and The Last House on Needleless Street. Little Eve also won the Shirley Jackson Award for Best Novel. Ward is the international bestseller of The Last House on Needleless Street, Sundial, and Looking Glass Sound, which comes out in August. And I'm doing a plug right now for Looking Glass Sound because I'm still thinking about that ending, okay? Our next panelist is Johnny Compton. Oh, wait a minute, where'd my notes go? There we go. Sorry, it's my third panel for the weekend. I'm like, my notes are all everywhere. He is the creator and host of the podcast Healthy Fears, has written short stories for Pseudopod, Strange Horizons, the No Sleep podcast, and many other markets. The Spite House, his debut novel, again, highly recommended, was met with critical acclaim. Our next panelist is someone, like I said, I mentioned being a fangirl. I've been a big fan of this panelist for quite some time. Silvia Moreno-Garcia is the best-selling author of Mexican Gothic, Velvet Was the Night, the daughter of Dr. Moreau, and the forthcoming Silver Nitrate, amongst many other books. And our final panelist is Erin A. Craig. She is the New York Times bestselling author of House of Salt and Sorrow and Small Favors. She is an avid reader, embroidery enthusiast, same, and a rapid basketball fan, and a collector of typewriters. Thank you all for being here. I'm so excited to talk about why. Let's begin right away. Why horror? What led you to write within this genre? I'm going to start with Chuck and go our way down.
Oh, dang. Oh, okay. There I am. I think horror is it's an important genre. I've kind of talked a little bit about this. You know, I write a lot of erotic and romance. I also write horror. And I think sometimes buckaroos think that I am writing comedy, although it's pretty dang, I think my stories seem kind of normal, but everyone says they have an unusual way. And I think these three genres, comedy, erotica, and horror, all, I think that they are kind of looked down upon by maybe some snooty intellectuals saying, oh, this isn't worthy of an award, or this isn't worthy of, just look at something like Best Picture in film. It's very hard for horror to be taken seriously in this way, and like I said, coming from romance is the same. Anything, I know this is a horror panel, but any romance people in here? There you go. See, there's a bit of a crossover. I think that really what's going on is these genres create reactions of the body. When you have horror, you have fear, comedy, laughter, and of course erotica, arousal. And these are our bodily reactions. And in other genres, you just kind of trot along and you have your story beats and you're creating this story. But you have a second mission in all these other genres I mentioned. And while those are kind of looked down upon, I think, for being of the body and not intellectual, I'm using air quotes here, I really think that there is an honesty in these genres of the body. We can't help ourselves if we scream or laugh or are aroused. These are things that are just deep instinctual things. And so I think playing around in this arena is so powerful and so visceral and honest and raw. And because of that, you can uncover truths that I think that the kind of the snootier intellectual intelligentsia are really missing out on. And not to say that those are bad either. I really think the most effective art for me and what I want to create is something that combines the two, that doesn't divide by highbrow or lowbrow, but that respects it all and understands that art of the body is just as important as art of the mind.
Yeah. Well, I think all of that's right. I think it's the only genre we have it's the only kind of artistic discourse we have that's interested in interrogating fear. We're not particularly interested in fear as a society at looking at it, or indeed admitting to it. Fear is kind of shameful. It's a sort of childlike thing that you're not supposed to feel. It's embarrassing. So we sort of tend to avoid acknowledging its existence. But I think that's why perhaps horror asks more and perhaps delivers more, asks more from the reader, but also delivers more than any other genre, because it does go to those, as you were saying, Chuck, those deep places. I think there's even a distinction to be made, even between it and other genres. In that, even with romance, not everybody will fall in love in their lifetime, but everyone will be afraid. Everyone will feel fear. There's universality to it and a leveling quality to it, which is perhaps why we shy away from acknowledging it. And that's why I love horror. That's why it does. It speaks to the deep places in us.
Awesome. I agree with everything that's previously been said. I tend to say that everybody reads horror. Even you go and do panels, you meet people, and there are a lot of people like, oh, I normally don't read horror. I never read horror, and I don't call them a liar, but I do think I think most people read, watch, experience horror, even if they're unaware of it, and so that's part of what made me gravitate toward it, is that I was fascinated by this, and I would see it in places where other people would not acknowledge that what they're reading or what they're enjoying is actually a horror story. So I just got started reading. There's a prolific, wonderful, primarily romance author, Beverly Jenkins, and she has a book. She has a book called Bring on the Blessings. It's a series of books, and the first one is Bring on the Blessings. And the prologue of that opens, and this is a comedy, romantic, love story, wonderful. Prologue features a moment where a daughter and her mother are eaten by rats. and it's very matter of fact, and it's in this kind of paragraph at the end it kind of leads up to, and it's and then her mother's corpse, she's trying to protect her mother's corpse from the rats, and the rats are coming in, and I'm like, this is a full-on horror scene. And I almost guarantee that most of the people probably reading Beverly Jenkins would also say, a lot of them anyway, would say, well, I don't really read horror, and I'm like, this is James Herbert. This is some fucking, this is the rats. They're eating a mother and daughter. This is crazy. So, and I don't feel like that's a spoiler because, like I said, it's right in the prologue. So I tend to kind of use those examples to illustrate to me why I think everybody actually enjoys horror, whether or not they realize it. And so since everybody's into it anyway, to Chuck's point, it's kind of seen as taboo. But also to Catriona's point, she corrected me at StokerCon not to say her name incorrectly, so I tried to make sure I get it
That's not
right.
unbearable.
I'm always going to give you, I'm playing. She didn't really correct me. But to both of their points, it's on one level taboo and kind of seen as shameful, and yet at the same time, it's something that everybody experiences. So why not just lean into it and not be ashamed of this thing that we all know that we're all kind of into anyway? That's my perspective on it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I always struggle with that question because the answer requires a justification, which is not the case with most of anything in life. People do not ask normally, why do you write poetry, or why do you write literature, or why do you read any other kind of literature? It seems to be specific for certain categories that we get to ask that question. So I mean, it's the same answer for any genre that I enjoy exploring or any books that I enjoy exploring. I am interested in the history and the context of the category and the possibilities that certain forms, tropes offer in terms of narrative.
I agree with everybody. I think I write horror because that's what I read as a kid. Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark were just coming out. The Babysitter's Club mystery series had some really good ones. And it just felt like kind of a natural progression. Like when I started to write my books, like I just leaned into the spooky aspects of everything. I'm also a little bit of an ostrich, and so I would much rather be thinking about ways to murder someone with like a werewolf or vampire or something than like cancer. And so like I would rather try to take the fears that like all of us do feel, things of loss, not being able to control a situation, and putting it into something that like I'm scared of, but I don't really have to be scared of. Like, I probably will never, fall down a staircase and have a ghost chase me. But, XYZ bad things could happen. And so to be scared of something that's more fun and less likely to happen, I think it's a good way to, like, protect yourself from, like, fears that you can't control. And I'm extremely type A, so, like, if I can't control something, it's, that is terrifying.
Since our panel is focused on writing horror, we do have to get to the nitty-gritty. How do you approach writing horror on paper? How do you get those ideas, translating those images onto the paper? And we're going to start with Erin and work our way down and mention any tricks or treats that work for you.
I write primarily Gothic horror, which is really fun because the setting is kind of its own character in all of my books. We always have like the big manor house or the farmhouse or whatever, but it kind of does become a friend and foe throughout the book. So when I start out, I always kind of create my world first. I'm very active on Pinterest, more so than I should be, my editor says. But I like being able to know, all right, I'm going down this hallway, this is the doorknob that I'm going to turn, and it looks exactly like this, and then start to build out past what the world itself looks like. And these are the kind of people who inhabit it. Like, this is their religious systems, this is the politics that they adhere to. And then find ways to make them go terribly wrong or at odds with what the main character is wanting, and try to just make their life as difficult as possible in a way that hopefully gives, lots of goosebumps and shivers. Pinterest. Yeah.
Right. So my latest novel, which is out this week, is called Silver Nitrate, and it's set in 1993 in Mexico City. It's about two people who work in the film industry and come across a movie which might have some kind of supernatural connection. So for that novel, the book opens with an epigraph by Henry James, and so that should clue you in. It's basically one of the exercises that I was doing with this novel is I was trying to write a kind of modern-day Henry James story. And if you haven't read him, he was a very famous ghost story author, and his stories had certain components that I thought I could tease and play with. So it was an exercise in looking at the Victorian ghost story form and trying to transform it into something different, and also merging it with my feelings and thoughts about 20th century Mexican horror cinema and some other horror cinema from other parts of the world, Dario Argento, but a lot of Mexican horror cinema. So it was trying to get together the vibe of a Henry James ghost story and movies like Alucarda and Hasta el viento tiene miedo, those kinds of things. And so it was an intellectual kind of exercise in a way. I mean, my books are not always intellectual exercises, but Mexican Gothic was an exercise in looking at a Gothic novel and deconstructing it and doing kind of a post-colonialist take on the Gothic novel. And this one is like a take on the Henry James story mixed with kind of B movies of a certain time period in Mexico. So it's just, I start thinking, how can I take that form and redo it in a different way?
So hard answers to follow. It's weird for me to even kind of process it, because I if anybody was on the previous panel, you heard me say this, I have what I consider horror brain. So a lot of just, I think of anything, I've literally just created short stories out of, I'll be driving down the street, there's a shoe in the road. Who had this shoe? Whose shoe was this? And now I'm piecing together, well, if they lost this shoe, what else might be in the shoe still? That's also lost. And where is this person? And are they missing these things? And so like, this is kind of where my brain tends to just immediately go. And so when I'm trying to craft it, then I did recently kind of realize that I'm still developing hopefully as a writer, and I'm learning that one of the things I try to do is write as though I don't presume what I'm writing is automatically scary. And I came to that realization when I kind of understood this is why I think I've avoided writing about the things that scare me the most. Like I truly dislike and disdain, have a strong disdain for heights. And I've never really written about anything involving heights, because to me it's really difficult to actually even explain it. To me, it's just, the horror story is just like, oh man, this guy was at the top of a mountain. That's it. That's all you need. What, do I need to say anything else? He's at the top of a mountain. Oh my God. So I realized that I've avoided that because I can't really explain, or I don't feel like I'm yet in the position, because I'm so afraid of it, to properly explain what makes it terrifying. And so when I am crafting horror, I realize that the things that I think I'm hopefully doing well, it's centered on not having a presumption that this is going to automatically be scary. Kind of like what I mentioned previously with, I think the horror is there, but some people don't always realize it. So if you're watching a Disney movie a lot of the time, people talk about being scarred by different things in Disney movies, and I was just having this conversation with my father not too long ago, where The Princess and the Frog was on, and my littlest nephew was watching it, and he was like, oh man, they make these movies so creepy now, like they don't have to do this. And I was like, like when I was a kid and I saw Pinocchio, what messed me up was like those boys got turned into mules and never got turned back. And he was like, that wasn't scary. And I was like, did you hear what I just said? And then he started thinking about it, and he's like, oh yeah, I guess you're right. And I was like, it's always there, but sometimes you have to explain, it's not always a presumption. I think this is what makes horror a lot of the time, is just kind of having to not browbeat somebody with it, but let them fully grasp, like, this is not just a character that this is happening to. Imagine this is a genuine person. Imagine this actual situation, giving them the true sense of what's taking place. So when I think of that scene in Pinocchio, I don't just think of, it's not just that he's getting turned into the mule and is going to be led into this crazy life of slavery while he still has a human brain. He's screaming for his mother also while that transformation is happening. And it looks painful, and they have to cut to the shadow on the wall because it looks so painful. And then it turns into the brain. It just scarred me, right, when I was a kid. And so I think that I always try to put myself in that mindset of I have to explain all these little details of what's making this terrifying, because some people are just going to kind of gloss over that. And it's like, no, I need you to stop and really think about this. This is a kid with a mother who is screaming for his mother while he's being painfully transformed into an animal while he still has a human brain. And he's going to be packed in with a bunch of other kids that this has happened to. And then we don't find out at the end of the story if anything ever happened. Like, for all we know, he's just still out there working in some mines or something. So that, to me, is what I try to fixate on whenever I'm writing horror, is making sure that we get that kind of personal connection to who these, to these horrible things that are happening to these characters, and really convey the sense of menace and terror that is, to me, obvious, but maybe not obvious to everyone.
I think horror responds really well to sort of inversions and subversions. And one place, and we touched on this morning, that I sort of start is think of something you really love in a place you feel really safe, and then how could it hurt you? That's why things like domestic horror and the ghost story, it's exactly work really well, is because it's taking a place where you feel safe, the home, and making it a hostile engine of menace. And so that's always a good place to start, I think, if you're coming up with your concept of your concept of your horror novel, and horror is a genre that's always in conversation with itself. The readership enjoys that. It's something. So when Silvia was talking about exploring new ways of framing, like types of discourse, then that's something that horror is really good at. It really responds well to subversions of itself. So I think that but the emotional, so it's a two-hander really, isn't it? It's sort of like looking at it from an emotional point of view, as in how can I lay myself open and flay myself bare on the page, and also what am I looking at from the canon and the heritage of where I'm coming from, and how can I build on that, or just flip it upside down.
So my process is pretty unique and in a lot of ways uncool and, quote, not good, not correct. And I've been kind of going out of my way to talk about that for a few reasons. I'll give two examples of what I'm talking about when it comes to making art. Well, first of all, the first thing you're never supposed to admit to as an author trying to sell your dang book, I do not read very much. I am on the autism spectrum. Any autistic buckaroos in the crowd? Heck yeah! I am proudly on the autism spectrum. I'm glad you all are as well. And so for me, my hyper-focus, I can write like dang crazy. I put out a dang short story a week. When it comes to reading, my brain just starts wandering to what would I do if I was writing this? And so it kind of just floats away. So I end up getting a lot of my influences through film or music or visual art and other art forms than reading. And so when I think about writing a novel, I actually plot it like a film. I use beats from film, and I also imagine the scenes as set pieces, which is a very cinematic kind of a trot to have, and is unique to my way. And then the second thing that I draw on is there's kind of a conversation. This one is also very taboo. I'm just going to admit it all up here. There is kind of a conversation of what is leading your story. What is the touchstone of your art? Is it the story beats? Is it character? And there's kind of this battle. And everyone, you go to any writing class, they're going to tell you character. Your character's got a lead. And for me, it is neither, actually. My touchstone, the thing driving my stories, is always message. I always think, what is the point of this? What am I giving the audience? If someone's going to take, dang, a few days of their life to dedicate to my book, I'm honored by that, but I need to respect that. So I always think, I got to give you something, even if that message is just dang robots beating each other up for entertainment. That's still a point. That's your message. And so I always come back to that. And the reason that I am admitting these things as an author that you're never supposed to admit, which is that I don't read very much and that characters do not lead my story, is that, I'm up here with these incredible authors. Every single one of us has given a different answer to our process. And so for all the writers out here, just know that, you can find success with a path that you chart. And you don't have to just find what resonates with you. Find that process that makes you feel something. And that, I think, can really resonate with other people. And just remember, if you get discouraged because you think, well, all my favorite artists are doing it this way or that, and I can't figure it out. But there is no correct way to make your art. It doesn't exist. The correct way to make your art is your own honest way to do it. And if that means drawing from film instead of books when you're a writer, or leading with message, then so be it. You are the one in charge of your own art, and that can resonate across timelines and create so much power. So just never forget that.
There may, however, be one correct way of making art, which is Patricia Highsmith's way of making art, which is to write lying in bed, drinking whiskey, and smoking.
Yes, some work better than others.
Because Chuck is here, and as you know, love is real. But here's the thing. All the authors on this panel in their books have an element of love in their stories. And I was curious, considering how love plays a major part in all of our author stories, whether it be love through friendship, family, romantic, platonic, or obsession. Why is love a major component in writing horror stories? And we're going to start with Chuck and go our way down.
Wow. Well, I mean, love is it is so many things, and really it is connection in a lot of ways, and so. As with any story that will really draw you in, I think having a foundation of that connection, I mean, dang, that's instantly high stakes if you have love in your dang tail. I also think that just drawing on, when I say love is real, I think sometimes buckaroos hear that and think, oh, that's just positivity all the time. And I always want to make sure that others realize that's not really what it means. Love can mean loving someone else, but it can also mean loving yourself and putting up a boundary. There is toxic positivity is a thing. If you're in a relationship with someone, I don't want anyone to think, oh, love is real. I'm with this abusive person, so I need to forgive them because love conquers all. No, you need to love yourself in a situation like that, and putting up a boundary is proving love is real to yourself. So I think that love has a lot of complexity that can maybe be overlooked if it's seen as just this positive thing that kind of overrides everything. There is so much more intricacy than that. And then at the same time, in a genre like horror, these are dark places. So I've been getting a lot, well, Chuck, if you're all about proven love, then why write horror? And I would just say, when you're trotting around on a sunny day, having a great time, it's really easy to prove love is real. It's really easy to see someone say, oh, let me help you with that, or let me pay that parking meter, or you go ahead of me in line. That's easy when everything's just fine. Proving love in the darkness, in the hard-to-reach places, that is where love and the power of love really shines. And so I think that horror is such a good genre for that, because it gives you a place to explore kind of love when it will shine the brightest.
So the first line of Looking Glass Sound is the main character Wilder saying, "I plan on falling in love this summer." And in a way, this book is all about love. And I think there's something, I don't know, there feels like there's a commonality between love and storytelling and novel writing, in that they're a constant quest for perfection and a relentless optimism and belief in this almost, arguably or inarguably, unachievable state of of perfection. But this book is also about, as I was saying, take something you love and make it bite you. Is kind of my version of horror, and this is taking what I love, which is books and story, and it becomes the engine of danger. It's my love letter to Stephen King country, and it's very much all these things, which are things that are very close to my heart, do become menacing. So my love, in a way, is turned against itself.
Man, just what Chuck said, I mean, obviously what both of you said resonates so well, but what Chuck said, love raises the stakes, and it sounds very mercenary of me to kind of view it that way. But as a writer, it is a tool in your toolbox that I think does heighten the horror. And I feel like when it gets neglected in certain stories, it can be kind of noticeable, and it would be like, man, if these characters actually cared more about each other or loved each other, or you knew that these characters loved something, loved themselves, loved anything, it would make their fear even more palpable. And so I do feel like that's an important kind of component to some of my favorite stories. One of my favorite ghost stories of all time, ghost novels, is Michelle Paver's Dark Matter, which has a love story surrounding it, and so then it becomes not just about you're afraid for the character who's actually in imminent danger, but you become afraid eventually for the person that they love, because you know how much they love them, and so you don't want something bad to happen to this love, and that can magnify the fear. One of the most underrated, and I mean it's not explored in depth, but I think one of the most underrated examinations of also love tethered to a horrible moment comes in the movie Scream, which I think most people don't think of as kind of examining this at all, but when Casey Becker gets murdered at the very beginning, her parents are listening on the line, and it's her parents, and they're hearing her get killed, and she's barely able to even whisper through the phone, Craven does this great job. This movie that everybody thinks of as more just a comedy and a deconstruction of slashers and kind of poking fun at slashers was meant to end the slasher. That scene is played completely straight. Craven actually had a heart and a very big sentimental side, actually, when you examine a lot of his work. And he plays up the sentimentality of it and the music of it. It's not like something that's treated as a joke at all. And the parents and the mother grieving, and she's saying, I can hear her. And they're wondering, where is she? And their daughter is dying. They love her. And that magnifies the horror. So it's not just about literally the guts spilling and, she's strung up and you can see her in the tree and her guts are out, etc. To me, that's, I understand you got to play up to the audience for the visual components. To me, the scene that gets to me the most when I think of that movie is that moment and how horrifying that would be to be in that situation. And it's tethered to the obvious element of parental love for the daughter. And I would imagine even as well, I mean, that's, if I could think of, some of the worst things that could ever happen to my parents, that's like, I would never want them to suffer through something like that. And that's all revolving around the concept of love. So I do feel like it's an awesome, it's a fantastic emotion to explore in horror, turning what you love against you and having what you love attack you, or finding love in these darker places that are where it's more difficult to shine a light on it. I think that those, focusing on those elements of it can just bolster the fear that you're trying to instill in your audience.
So I'll go quickly, but Silver Nitrate is a story really about the love of sound editing and about film and old films, basically black and white films. And the first few chapters of Silver Nitrate have no supernatural element. We're just getting into this world of sound editing and the Mexican entertainment industry. And some people might wonder why that is happening. They might say, this is boring, is this a horror novel, isn't something scary supposed to happen? But I mean, there were two reasons why I structured it, or more than one reason why I structured it like that. But one of the reasons why I did that was because I thought that you needed to be able to feel the intense passion that these two characters have for cinema as an art form, or the story wouldn't work. So it couldn't be just somebody mentioning and saying, oh, I like movies, and then let's move on to the ghosts, let's put it that way. If you did not feel this really very deep affection for this art form, then the structure wouldn't, it would be like building a house on quicksand. And so you needed that really deep connection. So if you're reading it, you might be like, well, why are all these characters talking about film? It's because it's the most important thing in their lives. It's the thing that obsesses them. It's their industry. And when you show that connection, I thought then it's only after that that you can actually kind of begin the ghost story.
I agree with what everyone said, especially Johnny's point about love raising the stakes in a scary situation and horror elements. I think the first time I felt true anxiety panic attack was when I was dating who became my husband, because I was like, oh my gosh, this is it. He's really tall, he's cute, he likes to read. This is the one. And then realizing oh my gosh, what if he gets hit by a car on the way home? Or we live in Memphis, there's terrible drivers everywhere, all these things, and that worry and the panic and stuff, and would have to travel for work, and I don't know that I ever really experienced true anxiety until I fell in love. And the same thing when I had my daughter. It was oh, this gorgeous, beautiful, effervescent creature exists in the world. There's so many things that could happen. She's so tiny, and all these things. And so when I set out to write House of Salt and Sorrows, it's a YA novel. It's kind of expected you're going to have, a love interest shows up, and, Cassius is cool, whatever. But the big main part of my story was the love between these sisters. They start out, there's 12 of them, because the Grimm's brothers likes the number 12. And at the beginning of the book, already 4 of them are dead. And so these girls have been in mourning their entire lives. Their mother passes away, and it's kind of a pseudo-Victorian, so we have the full year of mourning. And it seems like every time they get to the end of mourning and life can start to lighten up, and we don't have to think of it, another one dies. And so to have these, it was very fun to explore the bonds of sisterhood, and just the things you would do for the person that you love, knowing that probably they're not going to be around for a long while, just precedence. It was really interesting to see what the dynamic of that would be like, and obviously you love these people, you want to be with them forever, but when that doesn't happen, what does your life look like after that? And so it gave Annalee a lot of really good stakes. I need to save the sisters I have left. I don't want to spend the rest of my life mourning these people. I want to have them here and be able to make these memories, and have all the big sunny day moments, like Chuck was saying, and it raises the stakes a lot. And then we, obviously had to throw in a cute love interest as well, which was fun to explore, but not as much as those big, your family is kind of the first big emotionally love attachments that you have most of the time, hopefully. And it was good to explore that and see kind of what it would look like in a YA situation where, you do encounter great loss early in life, and how that affects everything to come.
You all now have books. Many of you have published a few different books. Chuck, you had your first traditional. Johnny, you are a debut. What do you wish you had known what you know now that you wish you had known then that you know now? That's what I'm trying to say. We'll start with Erin and work our way. And then what advice would you have for new horror writers with that in mind as well?
I think my big thing when I went into writing and I sold my first book and everything, writing, is a very solitary act. You go and you sit in front of your notebook or your computer or your, typewriter if you're me, and you put out a bunch of words and stuff. And then when you get your agent, it's so exciting. You've got this great partnership and everything. And then you get your editor and the team behind it and everything. and it's really good, and it's this very like insulated nuclear family, and then like the book comes out and it really doesn't belong to you anymore at that point, and it's out in the world. And you get to go to all these amazing like Comic-Con and all of these different like book fairs and things like that, and like getting to meet the authors and like build up relationships and that. That I wish little Erin had known that. Like, that's coming. It's going to be awesome. It was very lonely, honestly, writing my first book. I had just had my daughter, and I was definitely in like that zombie mom brain phase of life that we all go through. And so for me, it had been such a solitary thing. And then like going into these events and stuff, and suddenly like you've got this really amazing community of authors and booksellers and editors and everything behind you. I wish Erin had known that those days were coming. I think my biggest writing advice, it's a very silly little trick, but I swear by it. When you're drafting, I'm not a fan of drafting at all. I would much rather be taking something and making it better. But I get very bogged down in like the details of something because I want to see the world that I'm creating. I've got to like visualize it completely. And sometimes those days just, I don't know what happens beyond that staircase or whatever. Or like I know there's a big romantic moment that has to happen and I'm just not in the mood to write it. The parentheses in Word is your best friend. You can just put a big parentheses and put insert, funny conversation here and move on. And you've got it. And then Word has a search feature and you can go back and hit all those parentheses. And so the moment when you search your Word document and there are no more parentheses is the most fabulous feeling. So it's a very like niche, trick, but I totally recommend it.
So I had done quite a bit of research, and so I knew most of the industry stuff already. But the one thing that was a little bit odd was to see how time functions in publishing, how the timelines are really, really long, more than you expect from the outside. It's sometimes you're talking years or months until something actually comes out. So it's very odd because I'm talking here about my latest novel, which is Silver Nitrate. It's out this week, but I'm already much ahead of that. That's like a ghost of a novel at this point that I can't even remember that well because I'm already way past that. I'm in another, like 2 projects ahead of that almost. And so it's this very weird stretches of time that happen, of silences. There's months where nobody's working in publishing and nobody tells you that. There's like no point in emailing anybody in a certain point of the summer or in December because nobody's there, nobody's going to answer. But I guess the best advice that, somebody told me this and I didn't figure it out and I was like, okay. It was like, don't deliver your manuscript early. And I was always delivering my manuscripts a lot earlier, and they said, same thing about time. It's like, it doesn't matter because they're not going to read it for 4 months more, and you're not going to get the portion of the advance until like 8 months later anyway, so you might as well not stress out and just deliver on that right date. I was always trying to do it ahead of time, and so yeah, but timelines are really extremely long, and writers' careers are, for that reason, very different from other kinds of pursuits. I guess it's film, it might be something similar where you're talking about something that you worked on ages ago and then it's coming out and maybe there were delays or things like that, so.
Man, Sylvia ain't lying. Yeah, the timeline thing, I was definitely, like you, I'd done some research, so I was aware, and yet when you're still going through it, you're like, man, this is not the exception, this is the rule. And depending on the presses you're working with, and indie, sometimes things can work a little bit faster, et cetera, from my observations, not really direct experience. So there's that. Kind of leaning into also just things that I wish I knew that I feel like I've picked up from, for instance, I'm a big fan of your work. And so I wish I would have better understood when to leave some stuff off the page which I feel like I eventually got there with a lot of editing, and even with my second book, just in terms of I'm very I had a lot of great references, and I'd research stuff, and it's not even so much about leaving stuff off the page. It's like sometimes you got to like recognize, okay, I can't get bogged down. Speaking of the timelines, I can't get bogged down trying to like research all this stuff. My next book is a vampire novel, and I'm like, all these, like, I'm reading all this old vampire lore. I've got the JSTOR.org folklore magazines that I'm reading because I want to go like pre-Lord Ruthven, pre-Carmilla, pre-Dracula, pre-everything. And also, like, I'm into anime, so I'm like pulling stuff from like Blood the Last Vampire and the Hellsing series and all this other wild stuff. But then at a certain point, it's like, hey, you gotta write the damn book. Research is fun, but you can't just do it. And so then it was like that, and then like I feel like you do a great job of having a certain amount of density of lore, and the world feels full, but we're also keeping the story moving. And I will sometimes find myself getting sidetracked and wanting to be like, I've researched this. You guys need to read about this. I'm a big fan of this, and you need to understand these references. So we're gonna do this detour here. And so I wish I'd understood a lot of that better, especially with the Spite House, because the Spite House is based on this really weird real-world phenomenon. And the earliest drafts of it, spent a lot of time getting into the weeds on some of that stuff. And, when I started getting into the editing process, I was like, hey, this stuff is really cool and interesting, but it's also not really what the story's about. So people need to just understand the high-level stuff. So it's like, okay, all my cool references, I'm going to remove all that stuff. And I guess, at a certain point, they're like, you get, into your career later, maybe author notes, that's what that's for. So that's what I wish I'd understood better, and I'm still trying to understand better. My advice, I'm going to modify it, my usual mantra, because Chuck mentioned not being a reader, and I completely agree. Whatever your path is going to be your path. So my normal thing that I say, my advice is always read less writing advice, read more writing. So I'm going to modify that to just say take in less artistic advice, absorb more art. So, and what I basically mean by that is I've seen even professionals, it could be us up here, anybody, you'll give advice, and then the art or the output that they admire might contradict that. And so I've seen writers give advice about, don't ever put this in your novel, it's bad. And then you go read their favorite 10 books, and those books all violate this rule that they're throwing out there, this advice. You're going to learn more from what they actually enjoy than you're going to learn from maybe their advice a lot of the time. Even, Stephen King wrote, I think it's in On Writing or it's in Danse Macabre, I forget which one, but he opens with basically saying writers don't know what we're doing. So he was like nervous about even trying to write a book about writing advice, because he was like, at the same time, he admits up front, don't know what I'm doing necessarily. You're just trying to make something good and hoping that it works. To me, the best thing you can do is not kind of find the lists of, these are the rules of writing, this is what this author recommends. If you see a list of what their, recommendations are, I'd rather read the list of what their best books are or their favorite books. And I think that you're going to get more out of that.
Okay, so two pieces of I guess of advice that I'd pass on that I wish I'd known. The first is I think there's a temptation to see, when you finish your novel and you get your agent, you get your editor, it's a bit like the end of the romantic comedy, and you're like, this is where the story ends. I'm going to ride off into the sunset, and everything's going to be fantastic. It's just the beginning of the story. You have, your career will hopefully will be long and storied and have lots of ups and downs and lots of different phases to it. So. Bear that in mind. There's a lot that happens after that carriage rides off into the sunset. And speaking of the second novel, I had a really difficult one. I could not write that goddamn book for all the tea in China. It was really hard. But if you keep writing it, it will get written. And that's just science.
Well, something that has been interesting about traditional publication. I self-published for so dang long, and Silvia and Johnny already said this, but just the dang time of traditional publishing, especially for me, a lot of what I do is to synthesize a news story that happened that day, and I in 24 hours publish a dang short story about it when I was self-publishing. So that's about 24-hour turnover time. And then comes to Camp Damascus. What the heck do you mean? I wrote this book 2 years ago. So there's a big difference. And what I have found is to not worry about that too much, because this is queer horror. It is also neurodivergent horror, but a lot of the issues that this is addressing, Camp Damascus is addressing, are kind of a systematic and they just repeat. The devils and scoundrels leading attacks on the LGBTQIA community really don't ever change their dang tactics. It's just the same thing. If you look at the way they treat trans buckaroos right now, you could just take from 1970s and 80s what they were saying about gay buckaroos back then, and it's basically a Mad Libs copy and paste. So I have found that a lot of, even though it's 2 years before it comes out, it still feels very relevant, depending on what you're writing about, because these things are systematic and they cycle through. And then as far as something that I would change, I have to say, I actually would not change anything, because I have a pretty strong philosophy that when making art for myself, and I would also recommend this, we can do whatever the heck you want. You can make art your own way, but I think that perfection doesn't really, at least technical perfection, does not exist. And that really what I try to do is capture a moment. If it is honest and it is visceral and raw and really captures where I am, then I think that's a successful piece of art. So any mistakes, quote unquote, in Camp Damascus right now, I don't think that exists. That is just a reflection of where I was. And I mean that down to, when I wrote that chapter, I went to my favorite breakfast spot, and they were out of breakfast burritos, so I was feeling kind of strange that day, and that comes into the book. That is not only valid, I think that's a beautiful, pure form of art. So really, even the mistakes I think are correct, and I think it's interesting, coming from self-publishing where I'm doing 24-hour turnovers. In music, we have a genre of punk rock, and everyone says, oh, well, of course, they're yelling and blowing out their voice, and that guitar's out of tune and a little rushed, and that's great. That's what makes the genre. For some reason, in writing, that kind of doesn't exist. If you have spelling errors in your short story, no one says, "Oh, that was just a punk story. It's supposed to read that." And I kind of fundamentally, I don't know if it is the autistic part of my brain, because logically that doesn't make sense, but I kind of fundamentally don't understand that. So I really do think that the errors, if you step back and look at them, are really not errors at all. That's an important part of your art.
So we just have a few minutes left, and I know there are budding writers out there who have questions for our panelists. So we do have a mic, or you know what? Go ahead and raise your arm. Go ahead.
So, Dr. Tingle, you had mentioned earlier that you kind of take in music and movies. So I'm kind of interested in your answer, but anyone who wishes to. What's kind of the soundtrack you're putting on when you're working?
Wow. Well, music is so important to me that it is book to book. I will say Camp Damascus is for the queer buckaroos, which I am, and the neurodivergent buckaroos. It's also for the metalheads. There's a character that really likes grindcore in this, so that was a kind of a big one. And then I would say, as far as just inspiration in general, my biggest point of inspiration is the album "Stop Making Sense" by Talking Heads, and film that goes with it is. All my writing comes back to that, because when I was a young buckaroo, I saw David Byrne on Letterman, and I thought that buckaroo is the only buckaroo I've ever seen that acts like me. And then that's how I realized that I was on the autism spectrum, and it was joyful. I know that sometimes buds get diagnosed with something, and they, what am I going to do? And for me, it was a source of joy, and that's kind of why I talk about it, is that maybe buckaroos out there who understand this about themselves can say, oh, well, that's actually pretty dang cool. I'm just like a dang Chuck Tingle now. So that music of Stop Making Sense is probably the foundation of all of my art, including writing.
And the mic is ready if anyone wants to come up wait a minute, never mind. I'm told to wrap it up. So before we go, I need you all to repeat something for me. AA09 at 1:30 p.m. AA09 at 1:30 p.m. That is the area for where you can go get these fabulous books, and I recommend you buy them all. They're all fantastic. That's where the signing will be after our panel today. So what was that number again? AA09. At? 1:30. Awesome. You guys have a great day.